So without further ado, this is Ask a Solar Expert. My name's Erin Taylor. I go by ET, but my parents named me Erin, so you can call me Erin or ET. And I'm also here with Matt Schuler from EnergySage. So here we are, and let's get going so I can tell you what's up. So just by way of furthering the point, Green Energy Consumers is a nonprofit, but we have a partnership with EnergySage to refer people for solar shopping. So we're both here tonight, and Matt's going to do the bulk of the presenting. So I just wanted to give a nod to EnergySage. You're going to learn a lot about them tonight if you haven't heard of them already. So just briefly, before we get going, I wanted to let you know who we are. Maybe you have met us before. Or maybe you just kind of heard about this on Facebook and here you are. So we're a nonprofit organization based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And our mission is to harness our power as consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. But when I'm out there talking to people who want to make changes in their lives to help us get to that low carbon future, or maybe to help save you money or whatever your priorities are, I really like to tell people that what we're about is enabling people in communities to make green energy choices. We have a lot of programs that really, we either refer people to vendors or companies like EnergySage that make it easy, or we try to make it easy for consumers to make green energy choices in their home and their lives. So we're a nonprofit. We were founded in 1982. So we just turned 41 this year, yay us. Our work has always been not just pro-environment, but pro-consumer. We think the two things are the same. When you do good things for the environment, ultimately you tend to make consumers healthier, happier, save them money. So our programs are really all based in doing research and offering practical ways for consumers to connect with vendors and install that green technology that they've been thinking about. Or if you need to replace your car, if you need to replace your heating system, we want to help you maybe make the choice of electric or heat pumps. So we do a lot of education around that stuff. And the tip of one of the like what I've just talked about is really like the top of the iceberg. Underneath all of it is a lot of policy advocacy. We have two advocates on staff, full-time advocates who work in Massachusetts and Rhode Island to help pass policies that make it easier for people to access green technology and help us reduce emissions toward a low carbon future. So we do a lot of advocacy because people participate in our programs, and because we have data on what people are looking for. We can influence the market through consumer choices, but also through policy advocacy. And that's really important to us. So today's agenda, just want to give you a higher overview. Matt's going to give you kind of a more granular agenda when he gets going. But I just want to touch briefly on other green electricity options that are out there, because a lot of people come to these webinars and they're thinking solar, I want to do it, but maybe not right now, or maybe it's just not really accessible for me for some reason. Well, you have other options. So we'll talk about those briefly. And then I want to tell you why Green Energy Consumers, a nonprofit organization, has taken to recommending EnergySage for your solar shopping journey. Then we're going to do a quick poll just to kind of hear where y'all are at. And our solar presentation will then be given by Matt, who's an EnergySage solar advisor, and he will explain what that means. But the basics are he's an impartial solar expert whose whole job is to help you make choices about solar. He has no incentive to steer you toward any particular installer. So it's just a wonderful service that EnergySage offers, and Matt's here tonight offering his expertise. So we're really grateful. And then what we're hoping for is up to half an hour for just to answer your questions. So again, on your Zoom bar at the bottom, there's a Q&A section. That's where I would love for you to type your questions. And also go look at other people's questions and hit the thumbs up if you really want to see an answer to one of those questions. Because if we have, when you upvote a question, it comes to kind of the top of our queue. So we know that a lot of you are interested in that answer, and we get to those questions first. We'll do our best to get through all the questions, but we might not. But know that what we're trying to do tonight is open a door here so that you can talk with Matt or another solar advisor at EnergySage, or you can reach out to me if you need some help taking the next steps in your solar journey. Real quickly, I want to touch on your other green electricity options that are out there. We do have a program called Green Powered. If you're a National Grid customer, it's also referred to as GreenUp. And it really just allows you to choose 25% or 100% renewable energy that comes kind of billed right through your electricity bill. It does cost a little bit more, but you're supporting local green electricity and you're helping to build new renewable sources in New England because we only source from new New England resources. So this program over the years has really had a hand in supporting 30 small scale wind turbines, hundreds and hundreds of small solar systems, many hydro projects, and even some anaerobic digesters. So it absolutely makes a difference. And for typically $20 a month, you can have 100% green electricity by just signing up on our website. At least 21 communities in Massachusetts and 7 in Rhode Island offer green electricity for community choice electricity program. So your community might actually have a green electricity option that is supplied by our nonprofit, Green Energy Consumers Alliance. So you can really check that on your town's website. Just search, I live in Arlington, Massachusetts, Arlington Community Choice Electricity. It will come up in Google, but also this website here, we have a list of communities that we work with. But if you don't see your community, don't stop there. There's certainly other communities doing this. Go ahead and Google it. The neat thing about community choice electricity is for a whole community, it's adding more renewable energy into the supply. So where I live in Arlington, we have 11% more renewable energy in our base electricity than required by law. We're also paying a really good price for that. So at many times we're paying less than what our utility Eversource is offering for browner power. So it's this really wonderful opportunity for communities to drive development of renewable energy, put more renewable energy in residents' electricity, and offer the choice of opting up to 50 or 100% by just signing up on your community's website. So that's a really great option. The other thing I want to give you a warning on is you will also get mailings. They might knock on your door, phone calls from competitive electricity suppliers telling you that they can get you a really good deal if you sign a contract with them. That's been proven by our organization and also the Massachusetts Attorney General to not work out on an individual basis. That very same supplier that can do a really good job getting a good price for a whole community bulk purchasing for residents, it doesn't do as good of a job on the individual level. So we just wanted to make you aware that competitive electricity suppliers, one, they're not always local green energy, and they're not really usually helping to add more green to the power grid. And typically they're a ripoff. So just pay attention. If your community has a community choice electricity program, that's good. If you want to join Green Powered, that's good. These are proven, vetted, endorsed programs. But if someone comes to your door saying, oh, sign up for this green thing, it's cheaper and, it's what, you got to sign here. Just don't do it. Be aware. And lastly, both Massachusetts and Rhode Island have laws that usher in a greener grid for everyone. The Renewable Portfolio Standard, or Renewable Energy Standard, and many other things such as procuring offshore wind. These things are law. So, and our advocates have been involved in a lot of the education of elected officials and the movement toward a greener grid. So one thing you can also do is support us We are trying to raise actually $4,000 more by the end of the week to sort of support our mission and that advocacy work we do along with those programs I just told you about. So if you love this presentation, or if you love us and you're so inclined, even $10 makes a difference. So now I want to get into the solar part of this webinar. I want to tell you why we, as an organization that has been involved with helping people move towards solar since the late 1990s, people have always come to us asking about solar, and we've always tried to help them in various ways through various partners. But what we discovered in 2017 is that EnergySage was doing it well. Transparency, consumer protection, easy to use, privacy, it was all there. So we started recommending that our members talk to EnergySage. So you can get side-by-side quotes by signing up for the EnergySage portal, and we're going to tell you how to do that, and look at them apples to apples. You can talk to someone like Matt if you need help making a decision or understanding them. It's easy and free to register, and the installers will not get your personal contact information unless you choose. So they can't reach out to you unless you want them to. So that's also this wonderful thing, is no sales pressure. So with that, I'm going to start moving us toward Matt's part of the presentation. But before we do, I want to take a poll. So I'm going to put a poll up on the screen. It's going to be 2 questions. And it's, where are you in your solar journey? So I'm going to give you 30 seconds. So if you want to answer the first question, where are you in your solar journey? Starting out, have you registered for EnergySage by any chance? Are you comparing quotes and installers? What's the most appropriate stage for you? You might be in 2 of these places, but pick one. And then on number 2, what's been your biggest hurdle? Cost, the roof, finding an installer, understanding the rebate, doing the paperwork. No hurdles yet? Perhaps I should have put an other category, but try to fit yourself in here. All right, I see a lot of answers now, so I'm going to end the poll in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So here are our results. A lot of you are starting out. Few of you have already registered for EnergySage and are comparing quotes or in the installation process. And for your concerns, we have a pretty even tie about costs, the roof, and the rebates. So lucky for all of you, we are going to go over that stuff. So without further ado, introducing Matt.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, ET, for the introduction and the great starting point there. And EnergySage, we've been working with GECA, with the Green Energy Consumers Alliance, for years now. They're a fantastic partner of ours. We love the mission that they have, and we think that it aligns really well with who we are as well, which is part of what I'll be talking about today. So before we go into specifics, quick introduction about myself. I'm a senior energy advisor over here at EnergySage. I've been here a little north of 3 years now, having previously worked in the public sector in the clean energy market for New England as well. I worked for the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And so I've kind of seen both sides of the coin there. And I think that solar specifically, but clean energy as a whole, is obviously a huge piece of our energy transition for making sort of a cleaner, more sustainable future. And companies like GECA, I think, are really important for kind of being able to spread a positive message there and ideally reflect the problem that we're trying to solve in the community. But moving forward into kind of a bit of a background on EnergySage. ET, you can go to the next slide here. So quick agenda for what we're going to be discussing today. So again, given a bit of a background on myself, what we're then going to go through is a background on how solar actually works. What are the benefits of solar? How does everything fit in together? How does the interconnection work with your utility company? Ideally trying to give a very simple but basic background of sort of what to expect when you're approaching a solar searching process, what's actually going on your roof, on your property, and how that full installation process works. From there, we'll do a bit of a background on community solar, one of the other offerings that we offer through our platform, and then finally go into the EnergySage overview. So how does the process work actually doing all of this through EnergySage? What does our platform look like? What is the problem that we are trying to solve, and how can we really assist you every step of the way? So hopefully it'll be helpful for people. I know we've already gotten a number of great questions on the Q&A section so far. We will try to get through as many of those questions as possible. If some of the questions are maybe a little bit more specific or not quite directly topic oriented, we might recommend you take them offline. ET, I think we will be following up after the webinar as well with some contact info, right? So part of what I do, part of what our team does at EnergySage is ideally serve to give you a direct one-on-one option for really being able to review your questions and resources. And so happy to, if we're not able to get through every question today, or if there's something that makes more sense to cover directly, we're happy to give you the resource for that after the fact today. But again, feel free to keep the questions coming in. If it makes sense to cover in the middle of the presentation, we will. Otherwise, we'll have some time at the end as well.
And also, I just want to go ahead and address one question. Yes, EnergySage, you work nationally, right, Matt? So yes,
we're national, yeah.
In Rhode Island as well. This presentation applies to Rhode Islanders, Massachusetts staters, and everyone else.
Yeah. So we're national. Although, fun fact, we're based out of Boston. So I'm actually calling in from Somerville here, so not too far from ET over in Arlington. So New England's our home base. That's why again, another reason we love partnering with Gecko. But yeah, we are national. I want to say we cover 38 states plus DC now. So good amount of ground that we cover at this point. And so again, yeah, my role here at EnergySage, I'm a senior energy advisor, and our team is really here as kind of the first resource for consumers using our platform. But so what is our platform? We are an online marketplace and content resource for customers looking to go solar, as well as explore other clean tech and clean energy options for your home. Our mission being to empower people to make smarter energy decisions through simplicity, transparency, and choice, which is where the marketplace comes in for what we offer. So we have thousands of content resources for customers looking to shop to help you educate yourself from the very basics all the way down to finer details such as local incentives and rebates, individual product reviews and offerings. But with a marketplace structure that we offer, which is, I'd say, starting with residential solar, but also extends to community solar and more recently heat pumps. We look to give customers who are looking to make the shift the options that they need to really be able to get a quality comparison, understand that you're getting both a fair price and also a connection with a reputable contractor or a series of reputable contractors so that you can properly clarify your options, get competitive quotes, and have a way to really dig into the information that you need to make the decision without needing to go directly to those contractors to kind of get the information directly from the source. So again, we believe that choice there is very important. It's one of the key things that our founder and CEO, Vikram Agarwal, always loves to emphasize when approaching the decision, is that it's necessary to really understand that you have options out there. And our goal is to make sure and make it as easy as possible for you to really dig into all those options on an even playing field. And that's where my role as an energy advisor comes in, is to really be the unbiased resource for helping you sort through that info. So as ET said, our goal is to not steer you in any one particular direction. It's just to help you make that decision easier, help you clarify the information through again, kind of an unbiased sounding board for helping review all that info. So as a baseline, really what goes into a solar installation? And we try to, again, break it down to its nuts and bolts here as far as what the core components are that actually make up a system itself. So obviously you have the photovoltaic panels, the panels that are actually sitting and drawing in the energy from the sun. But the energy that's generated off the panels is not actually usable by your home. So energy that comes off a solar panel is in direct current, or DC. Your home uses alternating current. So there needs to be a piece in the system that essentially makes the energy generated by the panels usable by your home. That's where the inverter comes in. There are a couple different ways to do a system inversion. Happy to cover that a little more detail after the presentation. I think there was a question about that. But the inverter essentially takes the direct current generated by the panels, produces it into usable alternating current for your home. Then you have the racking and mounting systems that mount the equipment either to your roof, potentially to the ground on your property, or even in some fairly rare cases to these larger tracking poles. But that's essentially everything, the equipment that actually secures everything in place. You have the performance monitoring systems that allow you to actually track the performance and output of your system itself. And then finally, the optional solar battery. Now, batteries, I'd say, are, if you want to consider solar sort of relatively established equipment at this point, batteries are definitely the newer side of the coin there. We are starting to see them be included a lot more often in quotes that we provide through our platform. About 1 in every 5 customers actually goes through with the solar installation plus storage at this point, but that number is going up every year, and we imagine it'll continue to as that equipment gets more popular and potentially a little bit more cost effective as well. But so again, the systems are maybe a little bit simpler than meets the eye. There aren't too many moving pieces, but overall, that's what you can expect as a baseline when installing solar in your home. Here's a little graphic of what it might actually look like once it's up and running. You have the panels. Everything is passed through the inverter and where it's redirected into the main electric panel in the home. And then it is either sent out to power the appliances and the electricity usage within the home, or exported back to your utility company through your electric meter. So most homes have a bidirectional meter at this point. If not, you'll have a bidirectional meter installed with the process of going solar. For some people looking into solar the first time, this might be a bit of a surprise. Solar does not technically make you grid independent. And in a lot of cases, you don't actually want to necessarily be fully independent from your utility grid. This is what we would call a grid tied system, meaning that you're essentially giving yourself a new primary source of power when you go solar. You're not completely cutting the cord, so to speak, from the utility company. During the day, you'll power your home with solar. You'll very likely even produce more energy than you need during those daytime sunlight hours. But as I'd imagine is applicable for most people, you don't use all your energy during the day. You probably use a lot of power at night. Maybe you're running the air conditioning. Maybe when you get home from work, you run a lot of appliances, but the sun's not necessarily out to cover everything there. So the way that all works is through a process called net metering. And ET, you can go to the next slide here for a nifty little graphic kind of displaying how this works. So in almost every state where solar has a viable market, net metering is relevant, which is essentially an agreement you'll have with your utility company, wherein when you over-generate power during the day, you send that excess power back to your utility company, and in exchange, they essentially credit your account for the energy that you're sending back to them. So they take the energy that you generated off the panels, they disperse it around your community, so it's still getting used somewhere, even if you're not using it, and then you're essentially prepaying the electricity you'll draw from the grid when you're not producing enough. So if I have a system installed on my home and I over-generate by 5 kilowatt hours during the day, then I draw those 5 kilowatt hours back at night. Financially, I've already covered it, or at least have covered a good portion of it. So financially, this is how solar makes sense, even if you're still connected to the grid, and how you're able to cover your usage, even if most of your electricity usage comes during the nighttime or during periods when you're not actively able to generate.
And this is why some of your friends with solar say they don't have an electric bill, or they only pay their electric bill like a couple times a year. It's because of net metering. It's because they kind of generate more in the summer than they use, and then work off those credits in the winter.
Exactly. Yeah. And to kind of quickly circle back to the battery discussion. So who does a battery actually make sense for? Because I do want to touch on that really quick. Again, people from a financial perspective, the battery is not essential. I would actually say for the vast majority of people who are just looking at solar, beyond obviously the environmental benefits, looking for the most cost-effective way to go solar, a battery is probably not a great fit. There's really no requirement for it. For people who are looking more for the energy independence, who are really looking to separate from the grid and potentially have some emergency backup in the event of a power outage, that's when a battery might be a good addition to consider. But again, it's not required for everyone. And thanks to net metering, financially, it's not required for your system to pay for itself. So again, where does the benefit of solar really come from? Obviously, as a starting point, reducing your carbon footprint, reducing your environmental impacts, essentially helping support both yourself and your community with clean renewable energy to reduce the grid's reliance on fossil fuels is a huge starting point. Beyond that, again, it's nice that solar can also be a financial benefit. So reducing or completely eliminating your electric bill, supporting the local clean energy economy in your area, avoiding rising energy costs is a big one. We all live in New England. I think everyone noticed their electric bill has gotten a little bit higher over the past probably 18 to 24 months. In Massachusetts, at least, it's been pretty substantial. That I'd say is inherently the difficulty of staying with the utility, is that utility costs are not consistent. Going solar, if nothing else, it allows you to prepay your energy costs for the lifetime of the system. You know what you're paying for it because you've already paid the solar bill, and you're essentially able to hedge yourself against those rising electric costs. Finally, it does increase the property value as well. So properties with solar upon resale are able to get back about 4% in additional revenue on average nationwide. So if you're planning on moving, but you haven't quite been able to fully pay off the system and avoided cost, you can still get some of that value back upon home sale as well, which is a nice plus.
Matt, we did have a question just come in about net metering. So I thought maybe we could jump on it. Is net metering banked power at the retail rate in Massachusetts?
Yeah, this is a great question. So in most of Massachusetts, it is. So the larger private utility territories, National Grid and Eversource, net meter at a retail rate. In Massachusetts, some of the smaller municipal utility regions do not meter at a retail rate. So if you're in a smaller municipal utility region, maybe your electricity usage is covered by your town rather than one of the larger utility providers, it's probably worth looking into. But for most of Massachusetts, it is a 1-to-1 rate, meaning that for every kilowatt hour you're sending back, you're covering a kilowatt hour drawn from the grid.
Do you know about Rhode Island?
Rhode Island, again, similar, given that a lot of the utility regions are from the same providers, National Grid and largely Eversource. I don't know quite as much about smaller municipal regions in Rhode Island. If you are on one of the smaller utility companies, though, the vast majority of utilities will actually have a page for this directly on their site. So if you Google your utility provider and net metering, chances are the first page is going to be a resource about going solar in the area. But a lot of Rhode Island is also 1-to-1. Yep.
There's one more question here. I'd like to know more about selling credits on the secondary market. And I think that's referring to net metering credits, although I'm not sure if you're referring to RECs.
So that sounds like it's referring to RECs rather than net metering. It's very understandable to get them mixed up. So net metering credits cannot be sold and transferred between meters on the secondary market for a cash value. In some cases, you can, and Massachusetts is one of the areas where this is in some cases allowed. You can use what we call virtual net metering, where you can share credits between meters, but there's no secondary market for net metering credits on an independent level. If you have a system that is still generating RECs can be sold on the secondary market. Largely, they're mostly sold to utilities for places that are still generating them, as they're required by law for utilities to purchase them. But those are a bit less common at this point, certainly less common in Massachusetts.
Yeah, usually through Massachusetts in particular, the SMART program, your RECs are going to be commandeered and sold as part of that benefit to you.
Exactly, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about virtual net metering when we get to the community solar section. There are cases where you can purchase net metering credits as part of the community solar option as an alternative, but less relevant for people going with the rooftop option.
Okay.
I've seen a couple questions here about owning versus leasing. This is a great question. I will, just to say that we'll cover that at the end of the presentation, because I think that's worth a bit of a more extended discussion. But definitely notice those coming in here.
Great.
Great. So a couple just general frequently asked questions in terms of what you should largely be thinking about when approaching solar, and says things that I'd say are worth kind of considering independently. Is my roof suitable for solar? So understand your property, understand what you'd be looking for as an installation option. Ideally, you want a roof that is east, west, or south facing, south being ideal. Good amount of open space for panels, easily accessible so that there's a simple installation that can be done. Lack of tree coverage is important. Obviously, some shading is not the end of the world, but you want to make sure you have a good open roof with good exposure to sunlight. One more thing about the roof as well, it is very common for people to need a roof replacement with the process of going solar. If your roof is in maybe the 15 to 20-year-old range, likely it's going to need replacement within the lifetime of the system. Very common for people to need to bundle those together. A lot of solar installers also do roofs. So again, not the end of the world if that's necessary, but understand that might be part of the process for you when you are looking to do it. Properly sizing your system. First starting point there is just understanding what your utility bill looks like. So that's one of the pieces of information we collect when people register with us, is asking that you provide us with an estimate of your average monthly electricity costs. That way we can send that to our installer network so they know roughly how much energy you use in a given year. Now, in some cases, you might want to size for a system larger than what you currently use. That's totally understandable. In that case, I'd say go in with an understanding of how much energy you use now and what changes you think might be coming to you in the future for future electricity usage, such as an electric vehicle or heat pumps. Maybe you're putting a hot tub in, think through what you think your electricity load is going to look like, and the installer can help you do the rest. It's their job to really help you ideally size that for the future. Federal investment tax credit, we'll talk about this in a second. We have a couple slides about the ITC, which was recently got a makeover with the Inflation Reduction Act last year. But essentially, the main incentive for solar beyond just covering your utility bill is the 30% federal tax credit. So you get to claim a credit worth 30% of the total installation cost on your taxes the year following your install at the federal level. System lifetime. So equipment is typically, at least on the solar side of things, going to be warranted for 25 years. So it's built to last. There's no moving parts. There's no consumables. It's really not common that you should expect to really need to do a whole lot of work on your system for the majority of the lifespan, barring any sort of malfunctions with the equipment. So you can expect, I'd say, again, warranty coverage for 25 years. Potentially, you might need to replace a couple parts in there within that time span, but it's going to last a while. And last one, we get this one a lot. Should I wait for better technology? So while it's true that equipment does tend to get better year to year, we have seen the improvements on the solar side of things slow down the last probably 5 years, certainly within the last 10. We've hit a bit more of a plateau within the last few, to the point where I'd say, if you wait a couple of years, maybe you get panels that are slightly more efficient, slightly higher wattage, but if you're able to cover your needs now, the benefit to you of another couple of years worth of utility costs is going to outweigh the benefit of waiting for marginally better technology. If you want to just get an idea of that, add up what your utility costs look like over a given year. You know, say if you haven't done that before, it's higher than you might think when you put it into perspective of 1 year of utility bills, 5 years of utility bills. So again, as long as the equipment today is good enough to get you where you need to go, I'd say it's worth considering that versus kind of waiting each year for progressively better equipment.
So Matt, I'm also just looking to address a question in here and kind of hammer down on a point that you made, is that the installer is going to help you size your system. So if, for example, you are thinking about heat pumps, this is like that. Thank you, Daniel, for your question. This is actually my case too. I'm going to need to replace my heating system. So you're thinking about heat pumps and solar, and you want to go ahead and do solar first. Will your installer be able to help you plan for that? Plan first?
Yeah. So they'll be able to help to a certain degree. At the end of the day, and I'll, as a bit of a look behind the curtain, last year we did launch a heat pump marketplace. It is still relatively in the beta phase of being only active currently in 3 states: Massachusetts, Colorado, and California. So for the Massachusetts people in here, if you are looking at heat pumps, I'd see if we can provide a link for that. Again, we are not widely advertising for it yet, but it's a very similar service. We're trying to help connect people with contractors, vetted contractors in your area, to help you get bids for the heat pump side of that project. The difficulty with heat pumps as opposed to solar is that they are trickier to size for without more of a detailed consultation. So a solar installer is likely going to be able to give you a ballpark of what you can expect regarding energy consumption. But if you think you're going to do both of those projects in tandem, even if the solar is going to come first, my recommendation would typically be at least to talk with an HVAC contractor. Give them an idea of what your home looks like. Do you currently have a ducted heating system? What's the square footage? They can give you a realistic assessment of what you can expect for your energy usage to increase by. And then you can bring that to a solar installer and say, I want a size for this. So a lot of solar installers will be able to help you have that conversation, but until you get a more detailed assessment of the HVAC work, it is just going to be an estimate.
Thanks, Matt. Moving on.
Moving on here. I think the next section is for the Inflation Reduction Act. Yep. So again, Inflation Reduction Act, this was a big boost to the residential solar market in the country last year. So key takeaways from it: the solar investment tax credit, which was slated to be sunsetted over the next year or two, was increased to 30%. It was previously 26%, going down to 22%, and extended through 2034 for residential solar systems, as well as applied to standalone battery systems as well. So what this means for you, again, essentially you get a couple extra percentage points on your tax credit, and you have a much larger window to be able to claim it. There are also a number of other newer incentives for programs around heat pumps. The EV tax credit was increased, so there's a whole bunch of new goodies for people looking at every aspect of their clean energy transition. But for the solar purpose, again, number you want to look at is that 30% figure.
And on the Inflation Reduction Act, green energy consumers have spent a lot of time dissecting it. So on our YouTube channel, and I'll send this to you, there are webinars that kind of go into a lot of these programs in detail for these different incentives, but it's a big deal. There's also a Rewiring America, and I will send all of this to y'all afterwards, but Rewiring America has an excellent calculator that sort of breaks down all the different things, because it's very, there's the big deals like solar and electric vehicles, but there's also like electrification, because like if you want to add heat pumps, you might just not have the capacity. And you might need to pay an electrician to add the capacity. So there's all kinds of things to help you with electrification. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Yep. Great. Yep. And again, there's a lot of figures here. I think we'll be able to share the deck. I think we're a bit tight on time, so people can certainly digest this a bit. There's plenty of resources. We have a full article on EnergySage dissecting every aspect of, as Green Energy Consumers Alliance has done as well, dissecting each aspect of the IRA if you're looking to get a better idea of exactly what you can get there. So there's plenty of resources out there for you to take a look at some of the finer details. But moving right along here, and I'll try to make a lot of this bite-sized. I think we have a number of community solar slides here. So if anyone here at the end of the day decides that, hey, rooftop solar is not for me, I'm not going to be in my home long enough, I'm a renter, I myself am a renter here, so I'm actually a community solar customer rather than a rooftop solar customer, but community solar is a great alternative. So I want to note quickly on the starting point, because ET gave a great background on the community choice electricity options at the start here. Community solar is independent from this. So community solar, we talked about those virtual net metering options where you can essentially, in some cases, buy net metering credits. Community solar is an example of this. So if you're ever driving along the highway, you see those fields with thousands of solar panels, chances are that was a community solar farm. Essentially, they are typically privately developed farms that are incentivized or mandated by the state or utility region to provide a certain amount of their power from renewable sources. As in exchange for the, again, benefits they get for building out these farms, they receive all the net metering credits from the utility for exporting all this power to the grid. With community solar, you can agree to purchase those net metering credits from the solar farm developer at a discounted rate from what you would otherwise pay directly to the utility company for the same amount of power. Meaning that by signing up for community solar, you can oftentimes get an immediate 5 to 15% discount on your utility costs right off the bat. If it sounds great, it's because it is. Obviously, you have to have farms available in your area, but it's a very low commitment option and alternative for people who are not able to install directly on their home. If rooftop solar is an option for you, that'll likely save you more money long term. But for people who are looking for a shorter term option, typically you need about a 6-month window to cancel, but otherwise it's a subscription feature that allows you to subscribe to bill credits, help support clean energy generation in your utility region, and discount your electric bills as a result. Again, key features here: utility company essentially pays for the net metering and energy they're getting from the solar farm. You're paying the solar provider for the credits they get from the utility company. We at EnergySage have a marketplace which allows you to compare different farm options around your area, see where the farms are located, read up on the developers, and start your application process directly through our platform. So this is a great alternative for anyone whose home is not a great fit for rooftop solar at the moment. Key detail here as far as how the payment works for this. So there are 2 different types of billing payment for community solar, either consolidated billing or dual billing. Consolidated billing is the simpler one, where essentially the community solar developer fully covers your utility bill, and the only bill you pay each month is to your solar provider, is to the community solar farm. So they pay your utility bill, and then they charge you a discounted rate each month compared to what you would have otherwise paid directly to the utility. So again, I'm on a solar provider who has consolidated billing. I don't pay my utility provider anymore. I just pay this community solar provider at about a 10% discount from what I otherwise would have paid. With dual billing, you actually get 2 bills. You have your solar bill and you have your utility bill. You're paying the solar company based on the amount of credits your allocation at the farm is generating. And then your utility bill is discounted accordingly based on how many credits you have saved up. So there's a bit more seasonality there based on when you're generating versus when you're using, but long-term, the discount is going to be the same. Great, we can move right along here.
Is there a long-term commitment? You said just the 6-month cancellation window?
Yeah, so again, it's a one-way contract. It's cancelable at any time. The only difference being that you typically have to provide a window for when you're planning on canceling. So if you want to cancel, sometimes they'll require that you cancel 6 months in advance. So if, for example, if you're a renter and you know you're leaving your current home or apartment at the end of your leasing term, cancel within that window so they have enough time to be able to clear out the system allocation for you there. Otherwise, you might pay a couple extra months more than you need. If you are moving within the same utility territory, oftentimes you can actually just transfer your allocation to a different address within the same territory as well. So you don't always have to cancel even if you're leaving the same address. So that was obviously a lot of info about the nuts and bolts of rooftop and community solar. Let's talk a little bit about the role of EnergySage here. So I know I gave a more generic background kind of at the top of the meeting today. Again, to emphasize, we are here as a resource for anyone who's looking to go through the shopping process and needs the extra assistance. Unlike Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we are for-profit. We like to describe ourselves as a mission-driven for-profit. In that we have partnerships with a lot of different nonprofits to be able to help provide the consumer protection angle that we think is to be frank, needed in an industry like this that is very new for people and has some, let's say, not so trustworthy players as part of the process of proceeding. So we try to make it as easy as possible to do the research you need, get quotes from vetted contractors. I want to emphasize, though, we do ask for some contact information as part of your registration. We do not release your contact info. We don't sell your contact info. We don't provide your email address or phone number to the installers who quote you unless you specifically request that we do. You can do all of your search directly on our platform if you'd like, if you don't want to get any calls from installers until you're ready to do so. Everything is done through our platform. We have a great network of vetted solar contractors that we have done our due diligence on to make sure that we think they are reputable, that we know they're eligible to work in your area, and that we would trust working with long-term. So you could go through the research process with us. Takes about 15 minutes to register an account. Then you'll start getting quotes within a day, likely up to a couple days. You can do the full quote review directly on our platform, speak to the installers when you're ready, get some updated bids, maybe have someone out for a site survey. Throughout this full process, my team, the energy advisors, are there to help you every step of the way, whether that's comparing your quotes, comparing any external quotes you've gotten, reading up and understanding the technology, all the way to saying, let's make a final decision. Let's see who the right pick is for you here and actually get that ball rolling. Once you've selected the quote, we get you moving forward with them directly. They'll finalize the bid, they'll do all of the applications for you, and they'll get your system up and running. This full process, I would say you can expect to take about 3 to 4 months on average, depending on your area, to actually get your system up and operational. If anyone here has registered with EnergySage before, these pages might look familiar. If you haven't, here's a snapshot as to what those quotes actually look like once they come in. So again, we give you a number of different installers to compare on. You can look at their prices, the amount of time it'll take for the system to pay for itself. You can contact the installers through the quotes and essentially review every aspect of the bid right from your computer here, right in front of your keyboard. When you're ready to do so, there are plenty of contact options. There are ratings and reviews for each partner. If you click on their names on our site, we have profile pages for the hundreds of installers who work through our network. So you can really get a really good idea of exactly who you'd be working with and kind of get the full picture of them as a company and as an organization. Last thing, one more time, I'll plug the resource that we provide. Our goal is to be an unbiased resource for you. We are not looking to push you any one direction or another. We're here as a resource of information to help you identify what the info you need to know in order to go solar, help you sift through the differences. Really, if nothing else, just serve as a sanity check and a soundboard to make sure you're looking at things the right way. So whatever you would find helpful as part of that support for going through your search, us as a platform and as a team are there to provide it for you.
Yeah, and one of if you haven't actually registered for EnergySage, again, it's free and it's no obligation and it's private, so it doesn't hurt to do it. We're going to give you the link to do it in this presentation and afterwards, but being registered gives you that really easy access. You log in and you can just schedule a time to talk to an advisor. We certainly have Matt here as a resource right now who can help you out, if you follow up with him, but it's going to be faster and easier also if you register. So if you haven't already done that and you really think about solar, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I would always recommend if you want to look into this, register the account first, and then that's going to make the first conversation you have with myself or someone from our team a lot more fruitful once we have some more direct info to kind of reference to as we're going through the process. The quotes are not meant to be finalized right at the beginning. It's meant to be a work in progress. As we get more information, we help them get finalized and keep that process moving. But that's all ideally the starting point there. Do we have, quick answer to a question here, do we have locations in New York? We do, yeah. So we have, again, we're national, so chances are if you're in a state where solar is viable, we have some contractors out your neck of the woods. Great, and starting point here, I believe if you have your phones handy, you can use the QR code here to actually get started and register through the Green Energy Consumers Alliance portal on our platform.
And it's also at greenenergyconsumers.org/solar. And one of the reasons that I'd really love for you to go through that link or this QR code is if you do ultimately decide to go solar and you do it through EnergySage, through installer EnergySage recommends, we do get a kickback, and we put that money, $250 typically, and we put that money toward our mission. So if you want to do solar and you also want a nonprofit to get a kickback out of you doing solar, please go through that link. So here we are in the Q&A section. So Matt, I think you can see the Q&A too.
I can, yeah. I'm happy to just start running down the list here and see how many we can get through. Again, apologies if we don't have enough time to get through every question today. We will be providing resources for how we can continue the discussion, and if you'd find more of a one-on-one conversation helpful, we are there to assist. But yeah, ET, should I just start kicking it off here, run through some of the questions we got?
The first, well, one of the most upvoted here is key technical factors. I'm not sure looking at installing solar panels, what are the key technical factors, efficiency metric we should consider when an installer proposes a particular manufacturer model?
Great question. So we actually have a panel rating system on our site that was not designed by us. It was designed by NREL, the National Renewable Energies Laboratory based out of Colorado. So it's a relatively simple rating system, essentially 1 to 5 stars, but panels have to hit a certain baseline level of quality in certain key areas in order to fall into a certain rating subcategory. The factors that we look at there are going to be the rated power of the panel, so the panel size in watts, the efficiency of the panel, the degradation of the panel is one of the more important details, so knowing how well your panel is essentially going to age over time is an important one. Then lastly, the warranty coverage from the manufacturer as well, I'd say, are a couple of the key initial details. There are finer details you can comb through when you're looking at a panel, seeing like what it's rated for in terms of snow, wind, hail, the temperature coefficient, so how well it does in heat. So there's a lot of details that you can consider, I'd say. But as far as core metrics to consider, again, efficiency, degradation rate are a pretty good starting point for knowing how well a panel is going to perform.
And then, as you know, lots of upvotes on renting versus buying.
Yeah, so I know there were a handful of people here who asked a pretty similar question, and this is a great one, because there's to kind of zoom out a bit, there's a few different ways you can pay for solar. Cash purchase is obviously going to be one of them. If you have the funds to be able to pay out of pocket, that's always an option. If you're not able to, financing is very common. So being able to take out a loan for solar, there are a lot of solar-sponsored financing programs throughout the country, both public and private. Every installer who does solar installs is going to have financing partners they work with to give you loan options for solar. Leasing is the third option. It's not particularly popular at all through our platform, and I'd say is not as common now as it used to be. When you lease, essentially you do not own the system. You are essentially renting the system from an installer who is basically charging you a set monthly fee for the system that they're installing on your property. Typically, that monthly fee is going to be a bit less than what you might pay to finance, not terribly less, but the benefit to leasing being that it's probably the lowest out-of-pocket cost for solar. The downside being that you do not get to claim the federal tax credit. You do not get to claim any sort of purchase production incentives that you get for owning the system, and it can provide some tricky difficulties upon home resale. So for the majority of customers, I do not recommend leasing. I'd say as long as you're able to claim the tax incentive, it's probably going to be a better payoff for you in the long run to own, even if you have to finance. There are cases where leasing can make sense. And I think one question here was from someone describing their position as a nonprofit. This is a sensible alternative. So if you do not have any sort of tax liability, the tax liability is required for you to claim the tax credit. So I think there was another question asking that as an extension of the EV credit. You do have to pay income tax to be able to take advantage of that program. So if you don't pay any tax credits, you don't plan on moving anytime soon, maybe you're retired, then leasing can be an alternative as the lowest upfront investment to go solar. Otherwise, I'd say long-term purchasing is probably the better bet.
Great. Well, I think those were the most upvoted. So we can the next most upvoted is I have a side-by-side 2-family and I own both sides, but I don't know what to do with the inverter and tie-in and who gets the benefit. And there were also a few other inverter questions scattered throughout. So we can start there.
Yeah, I know there was the string versus microinverter question. So this is a good question. This is where this is essentially where virtual net metering would be relevant. As when you go solar, your system is tied to one distinct meter. You don't have a system that's split across multiple meters. So if you have a 2-family and you own both sides, but they both have independent electric meters, if you install solar, you either have to have 2 split systems, one for each meter, or one system for one meter, wherein you share net metering credits between the meters. Not every utility region allows you to share credits. In Massachusetts, it is pretty common. You would just submit what we call a Schedule Z to essentially connect the meters for the purpose of your solar production. Then you'll export a lot of energy back to the grid and essentially apply credits to both meters. So again, if you're in Massachusetts, likely it's possible for you to do that. I honestly don't know off the top of my head for Rhode Island whether that is still an option, but for a lot of the rest of the country, that's not feasible at this point. So again, if you have a 2-family, if you're in Massachusetts, you can probably get away with one system. Just make sure your installer understands that setup so they can size the system properly. Otherwise, you're looking at independent systems for each meter.
Wow. What about a couple of these other inverter questions?
Yeah.
Advantages, disadvantages of microinverters versus single inverter, and then the first question, replacing.
So micro versus string. So again, the inverter being the piece in the system that translates the energy to what's usable by your home, DC to AC. There are a couple different ways to do that. The more traditional type is with a string inverter where you have one central inverter that each panel in the system funnels into. The other type being microinverters where you have one small inverter per panel and the energy is inverted at the panel level. They are both proven types of technology. Everyone you speak to is going to have a preference in terms of which one they like to use. From a performance perspective, they can both get the job done. So I'd say if you don't feel like you have a preference, they're both feasible. You'll be able to monitor your system with both. Microinverters, I'd say, are typically a bit more expensive, but are also generally better if you want a system that's a bit more future-proof. Otherwise, they're as long as you're working with a good brand, they're both usable.
And what about an inverter that's off warranty for someone with a system currently?
Yeah. So if I'm interpreting the question right, I think the question is whether or not you're expanding the system and replacing the inverter to get something under warranty. If you're looking to expand the system either way, replacing the inverter and just redoing that portion of the system is probably the best bet. Otherwise, even if the inverter is no longer under warranty, if it's still working, that's not the end of the world. It just might mean that if your inverter does fail, maybe in a couple of years, you might be offline for a bit until you can get a replacement done.
What about putting panels on a pole and not a roof, or on a vertical wall?
Yeah, my understanding of this question was that it was asking about tracking systems where you have panels on poles that track to essentially follow the sun. That's not really going to be restricted so much on watts per se, but rather just panel compatibility with the racking system. Honestly, I won't pretend to be an expert specifically on tracking systems. They're very uncommon. But that, again, the question there is less about watts and more just compatibility. But any company you work with that's doing that type of install is going to have equipment in their inventory that'll be compatible there. I want to jump down to one specific question here while we have some time because it's an important one. How does EnergySage make our money? So this is another very common question that we get. Like I said, we are for profit, so it's absolutely fair to understand kind of where is our skin in the game. Like I obviously, like we said, we are unbiased. So to give you a little bit of background on EnergySage, we were founded in the early 2010s, again, as an educational resource for solar, as well as the marketplace model that we still have today. We got a lot of upstart funding through various grants from the Department of Energy as that consumer protection resource, as well as resources like the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. As we built out the marketplace, our model is structured so that installers do pay a fee to use the platform. So installers within our service do pay a fee to use the site. Among installers on the platform is where we play no favorites. So installers who work with us, they essentially they do kind of pay to play, for lack of a better term. So it's in their best interest to kind of keep us happy and work well with the customers using our resource. And we ideally try to help as many people go solar as possible to help the installers we work with succeed. So again, we are unbiased among individual installers, but installers do kind of pay to use the resource, which is where at least part of our funding comes from.
Couple questions about what happens at the end of the life of the system.
Yeah. So panel recycling does exist. I will say it's still relatively in its infancy in terms of sort of how well developed a lot of panel recycling programs are. This, I'd say, is a downside of the industry right now. It creates a lot of technical waste. Equipment has become a lot more recyclable over time. If panels especially can, I would say for a lot of systems that are installed today, if we're looking 25 years from now, given that we already have some recycling options, especially in areas where solar is pretty popular, I do think that's going to look a little different. Otherwise, though, a lot of equipment does end up in landfills. And panels can be recycled, they can be reused, but overall, not everything is going to be able to make it to a new home. In terms of the process, if you are having your system removed, typically you'll have a contractor come out to remove the system, and then either reinstall it if you're redoing your roof, or just pay someone to take it away, whether that's the recycling resource or, again, just unfortunately taking the equipment to a waste center.
Hopefully in our greener future, that situation will get figured out. We'll be recycling more panels in the future, but at this time, that seems like the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we're at about 8:29. I want to be conscious of people's time. But so Matt, I wonder if you want to take a scan and pick one more to answer, or two, if you can fit them in quick.
Yep. Let me see if I can find a good one here. I think we've covered a good amount of the options here. So if I purchase a battery with my PV systems, can I isolate from the grid during a power outage? Yes, you can. A lot of solar batteries will allow you to not only draw from the battery during an outage, but recharge the battery during the day. Otherwise, without a battery, your system will fully disconnect. But you can essentially kind of fool the system, for lack of a better term, into kind of thinking the battery is the grid. So your system operates within the confines of the battery's export and import power. You're able to refill the battery and then use the battery over time. So your system is not going to be operating at full capacity, but as far as a microgrid is concerned, at a small level, you can. Yep. We covered leasing versus buying.
Net metering work. How does net metering work in a multifamily?
Yeah, so we can cover that with multi-meters, virtual net metering. If it's on the same property, you can share credits in a lot of Massachusetts, at least, but not everywhere. Domestic versus international manufactured panels. The area where the equipment is manufactured is not necessarily the most important factor to consider. Some people prefer North American manufactured equipment. There are plenty of brands that are manufactured in North America, so if you want to request that, you can. But I would say it's not necessarily a requirement by any means. There's no shortage of panel manufacturers out there. A lot of manufacturers as well are starting to set up some local stateside manufacturing facilities as well. So some of them will manufacture internationally as well as right here in the States.
Well, Matt, unless anything else is really jumping at you.
No, I'd say this is a good starting point. Again, I know a couple of these are a little bit more specifically directed towards individual cases. I guess last one, the $5,000 Rhode Island grant. Honestly, I'm not sure if you can apply for it after the fact. Apologies if your installer didn't let you know about that up front. I would recommend going back to them if possible and seeing if they know anything about the application process there. But otherwise, I'm not sure it would still be available. Though certainly possible if you want to try to contact the permitting office directly to reach out about that, you can. Last one, will energy advise municipalities? I'm assuming this is related to Massachusetts municipalities. Absolutely, we do. Especially if your municipality still offers net metering. A lot of them do. Not everyone does, but a lot of them do. You can feel free to come register with us, and we should still have installers available to work with you.
Thanks, Matt. So we have some great questions, and like I said, if we didn't get to them, we are going to try to connect with you after the fact. Going to follow up with some resources. And just to close out, if you liked this webinar, we're repeating it. So tell your friends on July 13th. We've also got Electric Vehicles 101. We're doing it in Chinese and English on the 18th and the 19th. And we're going to talk in depth about rebates and incentives in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and through the Inflation Reduction Act for electric cars on July 26th. They're all free. You can register for any of them at greenenergyconsumers.org/events. And we also post all of our webinars, including this one, on our YouTube channel, and I will email you about that.
Again, if you like what we do here, trying to connect people with great resources like EnergySage, and also programs to help them install solar heat pumps, advocacy for a low carbon future, please donate. Even $10 makes a difference, and we're trying to raise $4,000 more by Friday. We are a nonprofit, and your donations do fuel our work. Thank you. So there's our contact information. You will hear from me directly following up within 24 hours. And again, thanks for all your beautiful questions. Again, that link is greenenergyconsumers.org/solar. If you want to go register for EnergySage, again, there's absolutely no obligation once you do. So couldn't recommend it more. And I want to say thanks again to Matt.
Yep, I really appreciate getting the chance to speak with everyone today. Really appreciate everyone taking your time out of this Tuesday night to come learn a little bit more. My email is here. If you have follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out, and absolutely take the time to register. Obviously I'm biased, but I think we have a great resource for anyone who's even remotely interested in at least getting an idea of what solar and the energy transition really looks like for you. And we are happy to help every step of the way. Completely free to use on the customer side. So as ET said, no obligation at all. Feel free to come in and learn more with us.
Yep. And we, as a consumer protection and consumer interest organization, endorse and recommend EnergySage. So feel free to tell us how you feel, or if you're having a good experience, or you or otherwise, let us know. And thank you for coming. Have a wonderful
great night, everyone.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We are thrilled to see this big and diverse group joining us to discuss HVAC choices for student health and learning. And thank you all for spending this hour with us. It is definitely going to be jam-packed. Before we jump into the webinar, I wanted to start with a couple of announcements for you. First, please be aware that the audience will stay muted throughout the webinar to avoid any mishaps. But that being said, we would love to hear from you during the webinar. Please type any questions that you might have into the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you can leave questions for us at any point during the webinar, and we'll hold them to answer until the end. And then lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the recording by email when it is ready. Next slide. So my name is Emma Hines, and I'll be one of your moderators today. I am speaking to you on behalf of RMI, formerly Rocky Mountain Institute. We are a nonprofit organization working to accelerate the clean energy transition. And I work on a really unique team here focused on the health benefits of transitioning away from fossil fuels in our buildings. And I'll pass to my partner, Sarah Ross, for a quick introduction now too.
Great, thanks, Emma. My name is Sarah Ross. I'm a co-founder at Undaunted K-12. Undaunted is a national nonprofit with a mission to support America's K-12 public schools to make an equitable transition to zero carbon emissions, while also preparing young people to build sustainable futures in rapidly changing climate. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Sarah. And we are also very lucky to be joined by 3 speakers today. Each will introduce themselves in a little bit more detail, but as a quick overview for you all, our speakers today are Dr. Erica Etland from Perkins & Will, Wyatt Ross from CMTA, and Julia Casagrande from the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. Next slide. So before I pass to each of our speakers who are going to present on pretty distinct subject matter, part of my role here today is to provide some introductory remarks and a little bit of context to help construct a cohesive narrative between the 3. So to make sure that we're all on the same page and have a basic understanding, when we talk about HVAC systems or HVAC, we're talking about the heating, cooling, and ventilation equipment that's used to keep the air in our buildings a comfortable temperature and humidity and clean from any pollution or viruses. And there are 3 big motivators behind this webinar, and these have also underpinned Sarah and I's work on this for the past year and brought us together in the first place. So to walk through those, The first motivator is increased attention. So you probably all know that we are now officially 3 years out from the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if there's one thing that has been reinforced yet again, it's this critical role that HVAC equipment plays in schools for disease mitigation and how school leaders can select the best equipment for that and beyond. The next motivator is increased need. So COVID is obviously still a great example of this, but to pull another one, we've also been seeing the impacts of school closures and lost learning time from extreme heat, especially in schools lacking cooling. And this is going to continue to be a problem here in the US, demonstrating a really clear need for all schools to have adequate cooling in place. And then finally, the third motivator for us being here today is increased funding. So we're recognizing that we're in this moment where that increased attention and increased need are being met with a new funding landscape with more than one source of funds like the Inflation Reduction Act and ESSER funds as well. And this is allowing states and jurisdictions and school districts to invest in their HVAC systems, making it important that we get those investments right. Next slide. So over the past year, Sarah and I have worked to solidify our thinking on this topic and to also make something of our desire to educate and advocate for cleaner and healthier schools. So we did what most folks do, and we wrote a report, and it was published back in January. So we're using this webinar to uplift its messages again, but also the voices of our 3 expert guests today. There's one more nugget from this report, though, that carries over into the naming and framing of our webinar here today, which is the title of having choices when it comes to our HVAC systems in schools. So we set up a framework in the report of legacy and modern HVAC equipment. And it's important that we communicate with you all here the distinctions between these two, because you're going to hear us and our speakers talk about the importance of transitioning from that legacy to modern equipment. Next slide. So let's start with legacy HVAC equipment. These systems rely on burning fossil fuels. That can be things like gas, oil, or propane, and they're burned on site in our school buildings to make heat, which is a relatively inefficient process. Some common examples in the school environment are systems like boilers and central packaged units. They may or may not be supplemented with air conditioning, and many don't accommodate advanced ventilation and filtration. It's also really important to note that when we say legacy, that we're not necessarily talking about the age of the equipment, but more so about the approach to making heat. So a brand new gas boiler is still in this legacy camp because it uses this outdated and inefficient approach to keeping buildings comfortable. Next slide. On the other hand, though, modern systems, instead of making heat, they move heat that already exists in the air or in the ground. And by using this approach of moving heat, we can both heat and cool our indoor spaces with just one really cool piece of equipment, and that's called a heat pump. This approach doesn't involve combustion of fossil fuels. It can be powered with clean, renewable energy, and it's vastly more efficient than burning fossil fuels, and it does a better job of ventilation and filtration. This transition to modern equipment is already happening in leading schools today, which you'll hear about in a little bit, and it really is the future for all schools. Next slide. So I'll wrap up this background by sharing that there are 3 key messages that we want to deliver in today's webinar, and each of our guests will speak on a portion of these messages. So the first big one is that transitioning to modern HVAC systems is critical to student health and learning. Our second message is that over the past few years, and especially now with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, that the economics are changing in favor of all electric and high performance HVAC options. And then third, which is really exciting, is that we already have fantastic examples of how states and jurisdictions and school districts are taking action on this transition. So now, with all of that background in mind, it is my pleasure to hand the mic over to our first speaker, Dr. Erica Etland, who is a true expert in connecting building quality to student health and performance. And she is going to dive deeper into this first key message for us. So take it away from here, Erica.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. Hi, everybody. I get to be sort of today's hype woman, I think, which is, so my name is Dr. Erica Etland, and I'm the director of the Human Experience Lab here at Perkins and Will. And much of my research is focused on how K-12 buildings impact child health and really what do we do about it. So to kick us off today, I'm going to go into two critical questions. First, the why now and why HVAC. So we're going to get into it. So the first piece here is that this is not new. And this discussion of ventilation in K-12 is not really something we have ever left in our sort of discussion. You know, it dates back to reducing tuberculosis infections in the early 20th century. And yet, what's interesting to me when I look at these images from almost 100 years ago, we weren't able to radically change the way that we responded to this last pandemic. We had outdoor classrooms, we opened windows. And so on the next slide, it highlights the fact that this is, you know, our buildings need to be thinking about this radically, and that as we modernize our K-12 buildings, that this isn't just sort of improving air quality for a pandemic, it's even looking right before. So if we think about 2019, we had a measles outbreak that spread through coughing and sneezing. This impacted 22 states at the highest level since 1992. Then we see that this is an equity issue. And so we're also recognizing that there's just persistent inequities when we think about asthma, which is one of the largest determinants of chronic absenteeism. And then we just have seasonal issues like, seasonal flu that is impacting 18 states also in 2019. So as I go through this and I think about, well, why now? On the next slide, it's really about getting into the data. And so we have growing evidence that our K-12 facilities are in need of replacement or repairs. And, if we look at this 2020 congressional report, what we see is that 54% of public school districts needed to update or replace multiple building systems, but 41% of school districts needed significant HVAC system updates. And so this is equivalent to 36,000 schools nationwide. So this is a really important time for us to think about, well, what is this evidence and what do we do about it? So next, let's get into the sort of why now from a human side. We all fall into the trap of maybe prioritizing the building, but it really comes down to people. And so when we think about improving our students' environmental quality, it's going to have a lasting impact on their growth and development. So every decision we make now actually helps when we think about the fact that by the time our students graduate 12th grade, they've spent 15,000 hours in their school building, their lungs have continued to develop and sort of function in a certain way. We know that kids are breathing 50% more air. And so all of these aspects are leading to sort of an increased susceptibility that we need to be thinking about. This isn't just an office building. This is really something where the people who occupy this space make this an important priority. And so on the next slide, we talked about, well, what is that growing evidence and research? Well, back in 2017, with the Healthy Buildings team at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, we started to dive into what were the 9 foundations of a healthy building. And what we found was ventilation, air quality, thermal health, dust pests, all are having radical impacts on our child and teacher health. And so this was sort of an early framework for us to think about. And I would say through the pandemic, we've had the ability to maybe expand it to other social and emotional, holistic health perspectives. But for today, I want us to just get into this. So on next slide, we see that we have this incredible report that kind of does all the synthesis for you. So if you're enthusiastic about acoustics, by all means, knock yourself out. But we found out that what was really important is that there's this incredible body of research that goes beyond even our RMI report, but allows us to really understand what happens if we don't make these health-based decisions. So basically, on the next slide, what we see is that there was a central thesis of this document, which was that health is actually foundational to student thinking and performance. So for every day that a child is in a classroom that's too hot, too stuffy, there's direct impacts on their ability to focus, to be attentive. And so at the end of an academic year, what are you really measuring? Are you measuring sort of their actual ability, or is it sort of being influenced by the student's environmental conditions that are impacting those test scores? So this is sort of why this is relevant, but I want us to get into why HVAC specifically. So if we get into this, what we see is that there's actually lots of sources of these indoor air quality pollutants. And it's everything from the furniture and what chemicals are in our products. So if we think real micro, thinking about viral particles like, seasonal flu or COVID, we also bring in other, common pollutants. This can be things like our adhesives, our supplies, and then it gets into stuff that is driven by our building. So it could be our school occupants, so the building as itself. So thinking about on-site combustion, when we think about some of that legacy HVAC aspect to it, we also see that some of our past building materials have migrated into the dust, creating this legacy pollutant situation that we need to be thinking about. We have seasonal pollutants, things like allergens, pollen, even just wildfires that we know can track across the United States. And then even the siting of the building. Is it located close to traffic, major airports, other sort of waste sites as well? So these are just important factors for us to be considering of, okay, there's this soup around us and how are we going to respond? And that's on our next slide, is really thinking about ventilation and filtration as a true spectrum. So there's three main goals of ventilation. One is to just control and remove some of those airborne pollutants. The second is to dilute indoor air with fresh or clean air. And that's the assumption that the outdoor air is cleaner than our indoor air. And then the third is managing temperature and humidity. So these are opportunities for us to think that it's not, well, do you have ventilation? There's lots of, nuance in that conversation that we'll get into today. But again, focused on health, if I think about the next slide, what we see here is that, again, that foundational piece. We know that when we underventilate our classrooms, we have increases in viral infections, increase of wheeze, sick building syndrome symptoms, even just satisfaction decreases. And with that comes, decrements in attention, comprehension, concentration. So no wonder then we see that there's impacts on our standardized tests. And I love this study on the next slide, which is just basically saying that a poorly ventilated classroom is equivalent to a student skipping breakfast. And yet we have universal breakfast, programs across the US to fill that need because we know it's important. And so to me, some of this work really gets down to an equity piece. So if I look at the next slide, what we see is that African American and Hispanic students, as well as free and reduced lunch students, are experiencing high levels of indoor temperature. So this isn't just about sort of the pollutant side, it's also about the temperature that they're taking their tests. And so what we find is that they're compared to their white Caucasian counterparts or their more affluent counterparts who are typically in that optimal temperature for test performance, we see that there's this discrepancy. So when we talk about HVAC, it's really also an equity piece. And so to kind of nerd out a little bit more on thermal comfort, on the next slide, one thing I would like us to sort of start thinking about, and this was really critical in the Healthy Buildings work at Harvard with Joe Allen, was really shifting our conversation around thermal comfort, which is really just a subjective measure of, how hot are you in this space? Are you comfortable in this environment? And really acknowledging that children have higher baseline metabolic rates, they have higher core body temperatures, their ability to acclimatize is not the same. And so when we even think about, how some of these standards were created, like ASHRAE 55, we find that, they're not maybe meeting the needs of a very sort of active third grade class, perhaps, and that they were based on sort of men in three-piece suits. So we have to sort of shift our thinking to something around thermal health. And so this is an assessment that's bringing in some of those personal factors, clothing and metabolic rate and physical activity. So on the next slide, we're jumping into the fact that, we see that there's this U-shaped relationship, that there's also cold stress as well as heat stress. And so being able to provide both heating and cooling in our buildings is critical, because when we see that we kind of go to those either extremes, there's impacts on, our memory, our reasoning, and our skills that make us sort of more susceptible, and especially young students. And to me, on the next slide is really when we think about it in the context of climate, that there's this important piece here, which is that in a study of 75,000 students, they found that students taking an exam on a 90-degree day versus a 75-degree day were 12% more likely to fail that exam. And so this is equivalent to the Black-White achievement gap. So we have a real important focus here, where if we think about the average life of a school building, how many 90-degree days are in our future? And so with that, I want us to kind of get into the action. And so that is it for me. So thanks so much. On the next slide is just my contact info and some other resources. And we get into indoor air quality a lot more in depth on a podcast called Inhabit, which is a Perkins & Will production. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Erica, for giving us an all too quick dip into this really deep body of research that connects the built environment with our human health. So now we're going to hear from Wyatt Ross. Wyatt is an energy and sustainability engineer with CMTA. CMTA is recognized as a national leader for delivering high-performance sustainable projects. Their portfolio includes the first net zero school in the country, Richardsville Elementary in Kentucky over a decade ago. It also includes more recently the first, as far as I know, net zero school retrofit, Buckley Elementary in Connecticut. And it includes the first building to combine WELL certification and net zero, which happens to be CMT's very own headquarters in Louisville. So Wyatt, thank you so much for being with us here today in Brian's stead. Where should we start?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So happy to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. So in addition, to talking about the health benefits and performance ramifications of our HVAC systems, we also want to talk about the environmental impacts that our HVAC systems can have in our schools. And so today I want to talk a little bit about what these modern systems look like in juxtaposition to kind of this legacy equipment that we're talking about, and what that means from an emission standpoint from our buildings, and then also what are some tools and some recent legislation that we can leverage to help achieve and implement and deploy these systems. So if you jump to the next slide. So with these modern systems, kind of a core concept that we're looking at here is the concept of electrification. And so when we're talking about electrification, what that means is it's the switching of utilizing combustion on site in our buildings to generate heat as it relates to HVAC, and switching to systems or technologies that are fully electric. And the reasoning behind this is that when we switch our buildings to utilizing systems that are electric, eventually we can depend on renewable energy such as solar, nuclear, wind, hydro, to generate that electricity. And the benefit that has, not only at the building level, but at the global level, is that transition will allow us to use less greenhouse gas intensive fuel sources that you see here on this slide. And it also will decrease the amount of air pollution that we're seeing both at the building level and our local community level, and also at the global scale. So if you jump to the next slide. For the most part, when we're talking about the fuel sources that we're utilizing for generating heat in our buildings, whether it be boilers or packaged rooftop equipment, we're typically talking about natural gas. And so what you can see in that purple bar there is when we combust this gas, it has a significant greenhouse gas impact, which contributes to climate change. And then in addition to combusting that natural gas, there's also what we call fugitive emissions, which are associated with the leakage of natural gas as it's distributed to your building. And so if we can remove these systems or the use of these fuels from our buildings, we can make a tremendous impact on reducing our overall carbon impact. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about legacy versus modern equipment. There's kind of 2 points that I want to make. And so when we're talking about legacy equipment, to Emma's point, these aren't necessarily old pieces of equipment in our buildings. It's more so that it's technology that is more traditional. It's been around, and it's not going to meet the needs of our schools in the future. And so we're talking about hot water boilers, steam boilers, things that can't achieve the efficiency levels of some of the modern equipment that we're talking about. But it also could be electric heat, which is resistant heat, similar to getting hot when you touch a light bulb, only going to achieve an efficiency of around 99%. The other downside of these legacy equipment, pieces of equipment, is that they can only generate heat, and we're coming into a world which will more and more so require cooling. And so this modern equipment, which we can more broadly classify as heat pump technology, has a couple of benefits. One, it's extremely more efficient, as you can see, 200 to 700% efficient, because it relies on moving heat rather than generating heat. And then the second benefit is that they can also simultaneously provide cooling. So they're more of a dual purpose technology. Next slide. And so when we look at comparing these technologies from an operational emission standpoint, because you're probably wondering, just because I electrify, where is that electricity coming from? There's still emissions associated with it. So what this is looking at is if we take a sample school in a region that has currently a fairly dirty grid, somewhere where that's using mostly coal-fired power plants to generate electricity, and we look at switching between a natural gas boiler that's generating heat at the building versus an electric heat pump, what are the total emissions of those two systems, including the emissions from electricity? And so what we see is over time, over a 30-year period, as we expect our grid to deploy more and more renewable energy and become cleaner over time, by the end of those two systems' life, a school that deployed electric heat pumps can expect to reduce emissions by almost 80% compared to a school that chose to use a natural gas boiler starting today. And so this just kind of gives you the sense of scale of the greenhouse gas emissions an electrified new technology HVAC system can save. Next slide. So all that said, you still have to pay for these systems. And so how do we do that? And so, I think it's really important to be aware of the recent legislation that has passed. I'm sure most people have heard about the Inflation Reduction Act at this point. There's kind of two big things that I want you to take away from the slide, and then you can use the rest as a text as a reference. But the big thing is that before, in the recent past, these tax credits have been available in some form or another, or they've existed, but they have not been available to public K-12 schools. And so that has changed with this legislation. And so now there are incentives available that can help cover the cost or any premium associated with these modern technology. And then the other big change is that for some of these technologies, the tax credit base has increased from 10% in the case of geothermal heat pumps up to 30%. And there's additional incentives that can potentially raise that. And so what that means is that not only can these heat pumps to modern technologies meet a lot of the technical needs of heating and cooling, but they can also meet some of the financial needs that districts are facing. Next slide. So again, we won't go into all of the technologies that are covered by this bill, but really the big one for our conversation today is ground source heat pumps. Also solar photovoltaics are covered, battery storage, some microgrid technology, and a whole slew of other technologies that we won't have time to get into. Next slide. And so just real quickly, I wanted to jump into, kind of a case study. This is a school that Sarah mentioned that we worked on in Connecticut, net zero energy renovation. It did not leverage the tax credits, but this is kind of a case study to prove out what it would have looked like if they had, how beneficial that could have been. And so this is a life cycle study over life cycle cost analysis over 25 years. And you can see if we just compared to a code minimum system that we could have deployed, it would have cost roughly $13 million over the course of that system's life to own and operate. And so if we compare that to the geothermal system that they went with on the next slide, you can see that we were able to provide them with a system that had almost a $3 million savings over the course of the system's life. The only downside is that it did have a small premium associated with going with that HVAC solution, and that was going to result in a 6-year payback. So if we jump to what these new tax credits could have done for the financial story of the system, is that it would have resulted in a 34% tax credit that could have covered 34% of the total cost of the entire HVAC line item associated with the system, and reduced the 6-year payback to 1 year, so almost an immediate return on investment, and saved $5 million over the course of the system's life for that district. And so the key takeaway here is that with these tax credits, one, before the tax credit, this HVAC system still made a lot of sense and had a lot of merit for all the health reasons that Erica was talking about, as well as the energy savings associated with the system. But with the tax credits, it almost becomes this no-brainer, first cost, best option, and then all of those ancillary benefits as well. And so this just shows the magnitude of impact these credits could have for looking at these options. Next slide. So quick, sustainability playbook here. How do we actually go about achieving and implementing these systems? And so when you have a project come online where you're looking to maybe do an HVAC retrofit or new construction or whatever it may be, kind of step one is that we really need to make sure that we're asking for the right qualified people that can design and deliver these systems. And so including language in our RFPs that talk about performance outcomes, whether it be the health and wellness outcomes, the energy savings, the system types. If you're asking the right questions in the RFP, you'll bring people to the table that can deliver those solutions. The second thing is during design, design of any school can be messy. And so you have to have advocates both on the design team side with the architect, the engineers, structural contractors, and on the school district side that can continue to ask the right questions, make sure that we're talking about the right things and that we're focused on achieving those objectives that we talked about today. The third thing, and this one's really important, as we transition to more and more modern systems and away from traditional systems where contractors and estimators are more familiar, that transition can be a little bit of a pain period. And so estimators, if they aren't super familiar with these new systems, you might see them put in some buffer or safety factors associated with the cost of these new systems. And that can kind of inherently price out these systems, maybe unintentionally. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're getting early pricing sets that are very detailed, kind of dig into the weeds and make sure that we're getting the right information so that we're not making any assumptions that might be wrong and falsely price out systems that we would like to keep. So the last step is then managing costs. And so I said it before, Buckley was able to achieve the geothermal HVAC system with a dedicated ventilation system and all these additional benefits before these ITC tax credits for the Inflation Reduction Act. So there are ways to keep projects within budget as long as you're prioritizing the right things. And so if we're aware of what the goals and the systems that we can deploy, we can prioritize those in and almost always make it work. And then on top of that, we now have these new financial resources and incentives that can kind of be icing on top to make these more feasible. And that's it for me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Wyatt. So now that we've heard from Erica about the importance of HVAC systems in schools and Wyatt about electrification and how the Inflation Reduction Act is reimagining the funding landscape for all electric retrofits, I am really pleased to pass the mic to Julia Casagrande, who will be giving us a behind the scenes look at New York City's recent and powerful commitment to electrifying schools. So take it away from here, Julia.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma. And it's great to have all of that information from Erica and Wyatt. I'm excited to dive into how New York City is working to electrify our schools and how we're navigating the different laws and priorities that we have in this space. So about me, my name is Julia Casagrande. I'm a policy advisor at the mayor's office. I work on researching and developing policy for New York City in the building decarbonization space and in the climate retrofit space. We've worked on developing policy like Local Law 154, our all-electric new buildings law, and our Clean Construction Executive Order. But I also work on coordinating and advising city agencies that are doing decarbonization work, particularly when there are multiple agencies involved. And that's what I'm going to get into today on the school electrification front. So next slide. I was just going to give a little background on the New York City school system. We have over 1,400 school buildings in the city, and that's the largest school district in the country, and then also the largest contributor to municipal energy use within the city. So this chart on the right shows that K-12 schools are 32% of our municipal energy use, and it's also our largest source of municipal greenhouse gas emissions. I would note these buildings are old. We're talking about legacy systems that may or may not be new. In this case, they are largely very old boilers. We have old electrical systems. We have old envelopes. We have a lot of historic buildings that are 100 years old and they are registered historic sites. So it's complicated to retrofit these buildings. That being said, our school construction authority and our Department of Education have been doing a lot to reduce the emissions of our buildings. As of 2007, we have all our new buildings following Green Schools Guide, which is the New York City Schools specific version of LEED compliance. And we have about 10 to 15 new schools that are built each year and have been following this since 2007. Obviously, it's been updated a lot of times since then. We also have a lot of efficiency work that's been going on. So across the portfolio, the municipal portfolio, the city has reduced emissions by 26%. And then there's a lot of innovative work with green roofs. We have a net zero school in Staten Island, PS62R, increasing amounts of solar, etc. But there's still a lot of work to do in this space. A lot of the improvements to date have been from like fuel switching and the electrical grid cleaning up, and there's a lot of work to do. So what I was going to highlight is we have 200 schools remaining, about 200 schools remaining that are burning number 4 heating oil and emit very relatively high amounts of air pollution. So that's sort of the universe that we're focusing on for this electrification initiative, and I'll go into that more on the next slide. So in the landscape, there's also some competing laws and priorities that are relevant to the policy decisions that we came up with. Fuel oil 4, I don't know, depending on where folks live, may or may not use this fuel, but it's a heavy residual fuel oil, and it emits high amounts of air pollution. The phase out of fuel oil 4 was required by 2030. When we set this policy, we actually just last month passed a law that's accelerating this phase out, and now it's going to be required by 2025 for schools and 2027 for the private sector. We also have biofuel heating requirements, which are state mandates. There's city mandates, but then the state mandates are more stringent than city. So that's what we're following. We're going to be having to use 10% biodiesel by 2025 and 20% by 2030 in all of our heating oil. We also have Local Law 97, which is our building performance law, and there's requirements for private buildings, which gets more press, but we also have municipal operations requirements that are actually more stringent. We have to reduce our municipal portfolio emissions by 40% by 2025 and 50% by 2030, and that's from 2006 levels. The last law I would note is Local Law 154, which is our all electric new buildings law. We have all schools will be electric by law as of January 5th, 2025, but they're already building all electric schools at this point. I would just also note that there's all these laws that we have to comply with, and then there's also our priority, which is to make sure that we're focusing on improving air quality and delivering benefits to New Yorkers, particularly in neighborhoods with high asthma and those that have borne the brunt of environmental injustice in the past. So on the right here is a slide that shows the discrepancy of asthma emergency department visits from air pollution in New York City. So we have Northern Manhattan and the Bronx really, and then some in central Brooklyn really feeling the brunt of that. Next slide. Thank you. So with all of that in mind, we needed a plan to get our schools off of fuel oil number 4 and also to leapfrog to electrification to meet our decarbonization requirements. So we did not want to do any more replacement in kind, putting in new natural gas boilers that would replace fuel oil boilers. We definitely wanted to focus on electrification. However, we have 1,400 schools, so we couldn't electrify them all right away. So in the fall, Mayor Adams announced the Leading the Charge initiative, which is a $4 billion commitment to electrifying existing school buildings. And we have 100 schools that will be electrifying by 2030. You may remember from the earlier slide that we have 200 schools that are burning number 4 fuel oil. So what we decided to do was no new boilers. We are retrofitting the existing boilers to comply with the short-term regulations for to phase out number 4 fuel oil and have the biodiesel contents, and using our capital, our big dollars to install heat pumps. So we're doing an operation and maintenance retrofit on the existing boilers, get the quick air quality benefits at a much lower cost, and we're focusing the big dollars on our school electrification project. Also note that we're starting in communities. We prioritize communities with high asthma rates, as well as a heat vulnerability index and high truck traffic, which just adds more pollution to the area. Next slide. So I just wanted to speak a little about the collaborative strategy that we used to get to this agreement. Within the government, we have our Office of Management and Budget, who committed to not funding new boilers. So they really decided where the money was going to be going, and that's how we got the commitment for the electrification. Our School Construction Authority and Department of Education worked super closely together to figure out the technicality of these conversions. As I said, our buildings are really old. It's difficult to retrofit them. So these teams worked really closely together on the technical aspects. Our Department of Citywide Administrative Services oversees our portfolio of energy use for the city at large. So we worked with them, and then our office more on the policy and advising. We also we've had a lot of support for this initiative. Environmental justice groups, labor unions, and community groups have been advocating for school electrification way before this announcement was made. There was a Creating Green Healthy Schools initiative that was directed specifically at the mayor's office to implement changes such as this. Of course, there's more to do, and they continue to helpfully push us to go further. But largely, we've gotten a lot of support in this area, and I just put some screenshots of tweets there. On expected outcomes, we saw a huge air quality improvement from when we phased out number 6 heating oil, which was the prior phase out. This was completed by 2016. From that phase out, we see an annual reduction of 1,200 tons PM2.5 in the air around New York, and that prevents 210 approximately premature deaths annually. We expect this trend to be continued with the accelerated phase out of fuel oil number 4. And in prioritizing environmental justice areas for electrification, we want to make sure that these areas have the additional benefit. And we will see a reduction in air pollution and improved health and keep New York City on the path to meet our climate mandates through leapfrogging to electrification. Just note, like, the city has a lot of power in where we spend our money, and we see this as a $4 billion market signal over 8 years towards electrification and decarbonization. So we're hoping this will help spur the market in New York City to have more contractors on board to do the work. And that's all I got.
That was awesome. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. The work that you all are doing in New York City is really nation leading, and we're so thrilled that you could share it with the audience today. We hope these panelists have inspired you all to think about what is possible in your own communities. After all, there is so much to be gained. You can read more about the 6 benefits of moving to all electric high performance systems in the paper. Our speakers touched on almost all of the benefits here today. And so right now, I'm going to assume that you're with us and that you are compelled and that you are ready to move to action. So let's go to the next slide. The report has a recommendation section at the end that is organized by role. So are you a state policymaker? Are you a school board member? Are you a parent? We've offered our thoughts on how you can champion the work from wherever you sit in the world. So please take a look at those recommendations. So I'm actually going to focus now on the potent moments for intervention that we cannot afford to miss. The first is new construction. New construction is one of those rare opportunities when we hold the responsibility of making good 50-year choices. So we really need to ensure that all new construction incorporates this modern HVAC technology. This can be a challenge, right? As Wyatt mentioned, there are contractors and some design partners that are frankly more comfortable with how they've been doing things, this legacy equipment, and change is hard. So if your community is building a new school, make sure your town leaders are clear on the importance and benefits of embracing these modern systems right from the start of the process. And make sure your design partners are also on board, or it will be very difficult to move in this direction. The second potent moment that we need to have our eyes peeled for is systems replacement. HVAC systems reach the end of their useful life and need to be replaced. The key here is to avoid what we call a like-for-like replacement. And instead, we need to make a break for this modern equipment. And again, here it's about establishing modern HVAC systems as the goal early on. We can't wait until systems fail to have the conversation. At that point, it's an emergency and we're destined for a like-for-like replacement. And the last opportunity is really about facilities planning. Our facilities plans that actually too few of our schools have need to reflect this desired transition from legacy systems to modern systems. These plans are sometimes called decarbonization plans when they absorb this lens. And our partners at New Buildings Institute have a great tool for that work that we will put into the chat for you all. Next slide. So with those 3 points of intervention in mind, we've all got work to do. And we've got 2 easy to digest one-pagers that you can use to open the conversation with leaders in your town. One is on the big ideas, right? A non-technical set of guideposts for really building understanding and therefore confidence in this area. And the second is a one-pager that recaps these 6 benefits of modern systems. So please use these as conversation openers. They are available on our website that we'll put again in the chat, so it's handy for you here. Next slide. And lastly, before we get to Q&A, I really want to recognize all of our wonderful supporting organizations. We have a stellar audience here today, largely because they helped us get the word out. And we are particularly appreciative of the organizations who contributed staff time, our advisors. We had a wonderful set of advisors on this paper, our leading contributors in the field, and we are so grateful that they devoted time to improving our thinking and our writing on this topic. So a big shout out to ASHRAE, the Center for Green Schools, the Collaborative for High Performance Schools, CMTA, New Buildings Institute, Perkins and Will, and Stanford. So thank you so much. So it's time for your questions, and I'm going to exercise my moderator role here and ask the first one. So for each of our panelists, in 30 seconds, this is your short little sound bite. Tell us what is the most important thing that you want the audience to take away from your presentation. We're going to go in order. So Dr. Etland, Erica, you are up first.
Awesome. So, I think one thing that became really evident from the chat is that HVAC is a part of this, but it is not the whole solution. And I think we have to really be thinking about, especially when we're talking about equity, that we take sort of this look at the hierarchy of controls and where is HVAC a part of the solution, but recognizing that all buildings are not going to be able to kind of get to the Ferrari of HVAC systems, that we need to be able to sort of think about where does behavior change come in terms of energy conservation, where does it come in terms of reducing, asthma triggers. So I do think there's, just something that I feel very strongly about that's coming through the chat is that it's not just about outdoor air pollution, it's about the indoor. And I think that's where sort of the human behavior side complements some of these HVAC decisions. And then real quick, coming from an architecture firm, I think it's really important that you see yourselves as advocates to hold them accountable, to make sure that they're giving you the life cycle costs, that they're really trying to sort of work dynamically with people like CMTA and having the correct engineers on the job to make sure that they're providing sort of the full energy savings. Because I know there's some back and forth that health is, wow, we're talking about health first and not about energy, but I do think it's so often forgotten about what we're really trying to get to. And it is so foundational to sort of the main purpose of a school. So let's think holistically about all of this.
Great. Wyatt, that was Erica's 30 seconds, maybe. What's your 30 seconds?
Great. Yeah. So I guess 2 things. One, I think it's really important to take away from this conversation just how important HVAC systems are on the impacts of health, wellness, thermal comfort, thermal health, emissions, energy cost savings. I think a lot of times HVAC can kind of be an afterthought when it comes to designing our schools. And so hopefully a takeaway is that, there's actually really important implications to what types of decisions we make as it relates to HVAC. And then, the second thing is there's a lot of things in the chat about consultants saying no. One of the things that I would like to say is, it's your building. You need to really push. If someone is telling you no, they probably have not done it before. These are not, bleeding edge technologies. These are things that have been around a long time. There are ways to make these solutions work almost always. And again, it's not going to happen designing in a vacuum. It does have to take into account energy efficiency, or else you're going to pay out the nose for a lot of heating and cooling you don't need. But if you can do envelopes right, if you can make other improvements to the building, you can make these things pencil out. And so you need to be, it's your building, you're paying for it, and really leaning on your consultants to give what you're asking for is a key thing.
Awesome. I love it. Julia, your big takeaway for the audience here.
Sure. I would just say from our perspective in New York City, there's so much work to do. There's so much work being done all the time. And I think this project and this initiative has really highlighted that, like, when money is being spent, we need to make sure that it's being spent in the right areas. So putting the big dollars in electrification and then prioritizing where we're doing it so that we actually make sure we see the biggest improvement in air quality indoor and outdoor for the folks who have the biggest impacts of asthma. Yeah, that's what I think.
Great, Emma. Well, I'm going to pass the baton over to you. Do you want to start us off with the next question from the audience?
Sure thing. So this first one is actually for Erica. So going back up to the top here. So we all know that you are a public health scientist and that you've been applying your expertise to K-12 school design for many years now. So this audience question was asking you to reflect on how often and whether the concepts of electrification and decarbonization more broadly come up in these conversations when we're talking solutions to the health and performance concerns that schools are facing. So from your experience, does electrification and decarbonization come up? If not, how do we bridge that gap?
I would say that we're at a point right now where those topics are coming up a lot more than health is. I would say that health is not as easily quantifiable as energy and cost savings. And so it's more of bridging our gap to be thinking about what are the health ramifications and what makes the most sense for our communities. I think this is something where we can talk about decarbonization, but it kind of gives me a little bit of like a back to the 70s where we had an energy crisis and we started removing all of our windows from our classrooms. And so we really have to be having sort of a holistic conversation about health. And that's why I really feel, and I appreciate sort of me getting to go first, in the sense that if we're going to have a conversation about decarbonization, we also have to be thinking about this in terms of climate adaptation and what are sort of the acute and short-term benefits of making some of these changes and investments, that it's not just a sort of a payout long-term down the line, but also things that, especially with schools across, New England and even to Cincinnati closing for extreme heat, we know those things will be felt pretty quickly. And it's an equity issue too. Who gets to have a decarbonization conversation is not for everybody. And so it is about how we're going to kind of lift all boats as we're talking about this.
Great. Why I've got a question for you, and it builds on some of what Erica was saying earlier too. So, when I think about districts that are building new schools right now, I mean, here I am on my high horse talking about how we can't miss this opportunity. And yet, as you know, probably better than anyone in this room, construction costs are really high, right? And community leaders are understandably sensitive to increasing tax bills. What would you say to a school building committee that is contemplating a gas boiler in new construction today as a response to those, very real, very challenging fiscal considerations? I mean, Erica talked about a Ferrari. Can we afford the Ferrari?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question. And, there's some legitimacy to that question. And there's also, there are things happening that, you can be wary of, that so you can avoid ballooning costs that, may be more figurative than literal. And so, I would say first and foremost, I think there was a lot of great observations in the chat about energy conservation and other things that can be implemented into design so that you're, right sizing HVAC systems. So you may not need the Tesla Cybertruck to get the job done. You might be able to get a more a Nissan Leaf or something of that nature, a more economy electrified system to meet your needs. And so, first and foremost, when I talk about managing cost, I think that's a big part of it. Are your consultants, is your design team, are you as owners engaged in a conversation to figure out how to shift costs around so that you can, make an economic decision? The second thing is, the reality is that there is inflation in the construction market right now, and costs are ballooning, and being able, in decades past where you really could almost always keep these systems within budget, that can be tougher to do right now. And there is a premium associated with these systems. And so leveraging the ITC, I can't emphasize that enough, these new tax credits that are available. You may not be able to go geothermal, and so your tax credit options may be limited, but if you can, if that's an option, if you have the land area, if you've minimized your loads enough to where you don't need as large of a well field as maybe you would for the standard construction, you can leverage those tax credits, and that can be in transformational as far as the financials of that project, making it the lowest first cost option. So I would make sure that you've explored all options if you're going down that route. The other thing that I would add is if you think about that 30-year time horizon that I said, where I showed a heat pump compared to a natural gas boiler. If you're putting in a boiler today, one thing that it's hard to quantify, but something to keep in the back of your mind is what will the regulation environment look like in 20 years, in 30 years, in 10 years? And so how could those regulations impact the cost of operating a boiler when you could have switched to electrified option and had more control over the pollution associated with that technology?
Thanks, Wyatt. So I think I'm going to jump in here and have us switch gears a little bit to talk about ventilation, since we've been heavy on the electrification side here. So Julia, if you'll join us for this question. The New York City commitment is very focused on electrification of space heating equipment, but as we've talked about today, ventilation is key to student health as well. So curious if you could give us a little bit of the details on how ventilation fits into this decarbonization plan, and how do you see electrification unlocking those complementary efforts on ventilation?
Yeah, of course. And there's a lot more detail of the actual retrofit plan than I could fit into 10 minutes, but the electrification projects absolutely include upgraded mechanical ventilation in classrooms and in assembly spaces. There's also, we understand the link between adequate ventilation and performance, and the school department makes sure that what we have is optimized, and what we're doing is providing more ventilation as we're moving forward. I would also note that these projects, I saw a lot of questions in the chat around efficiency, and the schools that we're working on to electrify absolutely include efficiency measures as well, to optimize the mechanical system. And then there's a lot of work that's being done across the board, again, around sort of optimization and right timing. So like if we're doing work on a roof, making sure that we're upgrading the insulation on the roof so that it has the maximum efficiency components, and same things with windows. When we have a new roof, we want to make sure we put in solar. So I think with a portfolio of this size, a lot of the work is around planning and strategizing how to make the best use of sort of existing work that will go on, so that we can incorporate ventilation, electrification, and efficiency as well.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Back over to you, Sarah. We might have time for one or two more questions.
Great. I guess I'll go back to Wyatt here for one more question on the cost side. Are the costs for Buckley that you presented, are those just for the ground source heat pump system, and how do you think about that within a broader cost environment? Like, were you able to deliver that project, which was net zero, a Renofit, and ground source heat pump? Like, how did the overall project cost per square foot kind of compare with a conventional approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the cost in the life cycle analysis I presented were specifically for the HVAC equipment. So I think, around $4 million upfront for the base case. And I think we ended up around $5 million. So about $1 million premium in total to upgrade to the HVAC system, plus geothermal, all the ventilation improvements, all the things that we did at that school when it was all said and done. And so the total construction cost, I think, came in around $27 million. I could be misquoting that. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that's correct. So the well field itself was around $850,000 for that school. When you take into account what you're leaving behind when you switch to a geothermal system, so that's a big part of getting into the weeds of the cost estimate. You no longer need the boiler, you no longer need the cooling tower, you no longer need the natural gas service to the building potentially if you're fully electrified. There's a lot of things that kind of get reduced from those costs that can be missed. So all of those are factored in to the life cycle analysis, as well as maintenance cost savings, water cost savings, and then operational cost savings from energy savings, obviously. And then with the tax credit, in the case where we could have potentially, if this had happened a year later and Buckley could have leveraged the ITC, the way that is working, because I saw a bunch of questions in the chat about it. And so the reason that K through 12 public entities, they're tax exempt normally, the way that you can receive those tax credits is through what's called a direct payment. And so essentially what that's going to look like is the federal government is going to be cutting checks for the percents that you normally would have gotten from off of your tax bill. You're just getting that off of the cost of the system. And so there's a lot of guidance that's going to come out from the IRS here shortly, kind of explaining the details of how that payment process will look like. But that's the way that it will be implemented. And so that's how that would have impacted the front end financials of the system. Did that answer the question?
Perfect. Thanks, Wyatt. So you took us straight to the end of the hour. So I think that's our last question of the day. Thank you again to our three speakers for joining us, and thank you all for joining us as well. We hope that you are leaving feeling motivated to take action. Give that full report in our one-pagers a read, especially focusing in on those recommendations towards the end. We would love to hear from you too. So here are mine and Sarah's email addresses. We'd be happy to connect you with speakers if needed. And again, you will receive a recording of this webinar soon by email. So thank you again and have a great day, everybody.